Okay, if we're all ready, let's dive in. So thank you all for joining today. I'm so happy that you could be here with us. This is definitely a topic that is really close to our hearts because it's something that allows people who experience communication barriers to be able to make choices about their life, to be able to have voice, choice, and control and really direct the way they live, which is I'm sure what we all want. So today we're going to be talking about person-directed visual communication. And before we dive in, I'll just share a little bit about who I am and what All About Inclusion is. So I'm Kate Alwyn. I have been working in the disability support sector for over a decade in roles such as recreation coordination, direct support professional, in management and residential care, as a trainer. And currently, I'm the co-creator of All About Inclusion, where we offer training, facilitation, consultation on a whole bunch of subjects, which I'll share a little bit about in a moment. I'm also a family member, so I'm a sibling to people with developmental disabilities. So I kind of have the dual experience of being a family member and a professional in the field. And some of the topics that I have focused on throughout my career are visual communication, because I have a particular interest in helping people communicate who experience barriers to communication, including people who don't talk using words. And I also have a special interest in autism and sensory support, as well as end-of-life care for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that's a little bit about me. I would love to hear a little bit about you if you feel like sharing in the chat. I'd love to know where you're joining us from, and if you want to share your organization if you belong to one, and what drew you to attend today, what interests you about visual communication. And while you're doing that, if you'd care to, I'll share a little bit about All About Inclusion. So we're a small business in Nova Scotia, trying to do our work in a way that's socially responsible and in a way that serves and resources our community. We provide training, consultation, and planning services and facilitation. And some of the subjects that we focus on are building community, supported decision-making, visual communication, trauma-informed care, and disability-specific training and supports, and much more. Yes, so that's a little bit about us. And today we're going to be together for about an hour and a half. Um, Feel free if a question comes up to write it in the chat, and either I'll do my best to answer it then or I'll save it for the end. We will have some time at the end of our session to ask questions and have a discussion if you'd like. And at the end, I'll also offer you some ways of connecting with us. Yes. So today we're going to talk about what visual communication is, why it's important, who visual communication helps, some of the different types of visual supports that are used or can be used, and we'll talk a little bit about making your own visual supports. Yes, so let's dive in. So I'd love to start with talking about neurodiversity and communication. So to quote Nicole Boehmer from Harvard Medical School, Neurodiversity is the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. There is no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving, and differences are not viewed as deficits. The reason that I wanted to chat about this briefly before we go any further is just because um, it can be easy for us to think that verbal communication is better than visual communication, but in reality, it's just that verbal communication is most normalized and typical for us, but it doesn't make it better. It's just different. So as we're talking about visuals, I just wanted to highlight that they're just a different way of communicating. They're not a communication deficit. So now let's take a look at what visual communication is. Visual communication is a way of giving and receiving information through visual sources, such as using pictures, rather than relying on verbal communication as the primary means of conveying information. Sometimes the way I think of it is if it were a movie, visuals would be the star of the show, and verbal and written communication would be the supporting actors. Let's look at a few examples of what visual communication can be. So this example is a choice board, and it's used to show that a person has a choice to make or has a decision to make and what their options are. These can be used for almost anything, from, what do you want to do today? Where do you want to go on vacation? What do you want to eat? And they're very useful and versatile. This is an example of a visual story, and these are often referred to as social stories. I'm going to use the word visual story because social stories are a very specific kind of social story created by Carol Gray, and they follow a specific format or pattern. And visuals can also be things like these signs and symbols that we see in our everyday life. So a lot of the time we don't even notice that they're there, but if we were to take a moment and pay attention, we would realize that we see visual communication in our environment all the time. And even if a person doesn't read or doesn't speak the same language, many people, if not most people, will be able to understand what these signs and symbols mean without without the language or the reading. So the other day at the gym, I decided I would try and find some examples of visual communication out in the wild, right? And I was like, I'm just going to take a picture of every visual communication I can find. And once I started paying attention, I realized there was just far too many. So I just selected a few examples to show you of how it's used not just for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but it's useful and used all over the place. So this example is showing how to use an exercise machine and what muscle it works. This is from the changing room, just letting people know don't use a cell phone. Here's an example showing what type of shoes are okay to use in the gym and what ones aren't. And in this example, they didn't have any words on it at all, but the majority, if not almost all people, will understand what it's conveying. And here's just another sign to help people navigate the facility. So, this way to go to the gym, this way to go play ice hockey. Yeah, so you can see how if we pay attention, we can actually see visuals, the use of visual communication a lot more often than we may have thought. So, who does visual communication help? And the answer is almost all of us. And, there are people who don't see or don't see well who may not benefit from it. Um, but pretty much everyone else can benefit from the use of visual communication. Um, it adds another layer of communication that helps people understand the message that is being conveyed. Visual communication can be particularly helpful for people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities, such as autism, FASD, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, and more. It's also very helpful for people living with auditory processing disorder or hearing challenges, and it has been shown to be helpful for people living with dementia and other cognitive disabilities. I'm also going to say, just note that it does help people who can't read or who don't read at a high level, and it also helps when there is a language barrier. So why is visual communication important? When we embrace neurodiversity, we understand that people process and express information in a variety of different ways. For many people, visual communication is their preferred method of communication. You might see that frequently for people with autism, for example. And it being a preferred method of communication is reason enough to use it, of course. But let's look at some other reasons why visual communication might be important. Many people find it difficult to process auditory information, especially people living with auditory processing disorder, which is very common in autism and other developmental disabilities. And we'll listen in a minute or two, we'll listen to a simulation of auditory processing disorder that might help bring this point home. I know it really did for me. Um, Visual communication is important because it can help make ideas that are abstract be concrete. So an example could be if we said, let's go to the store. Really, that could be any store. But if we had a visual that showed what store we're going to, then it really can become concrete in a person's mind. Another example is if we were to say, we're going to go in 1 hour. For many people, that is very abstract because they may not be able to tell time using clocks and struggle with understanding or giving context to the passing of time in a way that's useful for them. So a visual timer is a way of communicating the passing of that hour and making it concrete. Another reason visual communication is important is because not everyone is able to read or read at a high level, and visual communication offers a way of understanding information without needing to rely on reading skills. And for many people, visual communication helps to capture attention and encourages engagement. So, I mean, think about if you were reading a really long dry report. Does it not help to have some visuals in there to help understand the information and break up the text? I know that I find that it helps for sure. So I mentioned that we would listen to a simulation of auditory processing disorder. I'm going to play this, and I'm just going to give a shout out as well to the person who made this. And when I send a follow-up email, I'll put a link to this video and the person who made it. I'm really grateful that she's allowed us to use it in our training and in our webinars to help illustrate what auditory processing disorder can be like. So I'm going to play this, and it's meant to be a simulation of auditory processing disorder. And again, this is very common in people with autism and other developmental disabilities, but just also it can be experienced in the public at large. And it says headphones are required, but they're not, we'll be fine.
There was a boy named Jack and a girl named Jill. They were both brother and sister. They were both instructed by their parents to get some milk at the market since they ran out this morning from eating cereal. Jill put on her blue coat as Jack got his hat. Jack was all ready to go, but was not sufficient. 3 pairs of shoes to wear. Eventually she decided, and off they began their adventure to the market. Along the way, the dog street and immediately unsteadied it. Knowing well that they needed to be home soon before it got too dark out, he let it alone. Jack and says, "Wow, let's look for." Jill comments, "Yeah, I could just grab one and eat it." They finally made it to their time for supper, and at the dinner, parents about their small adventure to the market.
So that was I know the first time I heard that, I was like, wow, that really brings the point home that sometimes, even though a person might communicate using words um, and is able to at times, it doesn't mean that using like communicating verbally is the most effective or efficient way or the most supportive way even. So after listening to that, could you see how visual communication could be helpful to someone who um, processes information that way? Yeah, I definitely found that very surprising when I heard it. All right. Let's take a look at some types of visual supports that could be used. And before I dive into talking about the actual visual supports, I just want to highlight that the creation of and the use of visual supports should ideally be a person-directed process. So let's just look really briefly at what the difference is between person-centered and person-directed. So I'll talk about person-centered first, and I'll give a little example. So let's say there's a man named Jack, and Jack lives in a small options home, or in some areas it might be called a group home. Um, And he has a staff team that supports him, and they're fabulous. You know, they love Jack and they want to help him live a life where he thrives. And the staff team comes together for a staff meeting while Jack is out with his parents. And the staff team comes together and they're like, "We want to help Jack do something, really fun and meaningful every week. What could we do?" And they decide, well, Jack loves going to the movies. How about we take Jack to the movies every week? And then when Jack gets home, they go to Jack and they're like, "Jack, we're going to take you to the movies every week. Isn't that wonderful?" So that is person-centered. So they are centering Jack's likes, preferences, dislikes, values, etc., and making a decision for Jack accordingly, right? Now, if we were to shift that to person directed, that fabulous staff team would have gone to Jack and they would have been like, "Jack, would you like us to look into some things that you could do every week that you might find really fun or meaningful?" And Jack would have been like, "Yes, I would love that." So then the staff team researches some options and, they find out that, there's a good day to go to the movies. They might also find like somewhere that he might want to volunteer or somewhere that he might want to apply to work. And then they go back to Jack and they present the options. in a way that he can understand or best understands. And they let Jack choose. And in this example, maybe Jack chose the movies, right? The outcome could be exactly the same, but the process is different. And when we use person-directed support, it allows Jack to have voice, choice, and control over what his life looks like. So, how would we apply that to communication and visual communication? So, we consider the how, what, who, when, and where of communication. So, how does Jack want us to communicate with him? Does he prefer the use of visuals? Does he like to, it can even be things like, does Jack like a quiet tone? Um, does he prefer to watch videos about his options? How does he prefer to learn about them and be communicated with? We would also consider what would Jack want us to communicate about and what's important to him to know. So, for example, some people really want to know, like, let's say Jack living in a small options home, it might be really important to him to know who his support worker is that evening. Um, or it might be really important to him to know what supper's going to be, right? So, what matters to Jack? What does he want you to communicate with him about? We also consider the who. So who does Jack want to communicate with? You know, just to use an example might be uh, Jack probably doesn't want to talk to his parents about his like romantic life, right? And he might have a certain support staff that he prefers to talk to about certain subjects. So we also consider the when. When is the best time to communicate about certain things? So some people do not want to talk in the morning. Like they're just not morning people and they're just not gonna want to talk about this stuff then. Another example of the when is let's say this one has come up for me quite a bit in my career. Someone has a medical appointment, right? Some people find that really stressful and don't want to know or talk about it too far in advance because it just causes them a lot of anxiety. Whereas other people like to know far ahead of time so that they can process and think about it and all of that. Um, and finally, we think about where is the best place to communicate or talk, right? So does Jack want privacy? Does he find it better to talk in his room where there's not a lot of noise and distractions going on? Yeah, we want to think about how Jack wants us to communicate. And the other thing that I want to mention is we communicate with Jack, and I just keep using Jack as the example, but we communicate with Jack however he wants us or prefers us to communicate with him. So that might be using, visual supports and other ways. So he might like us to talk with them and have some visual supports. Um, but we receive the communication in whatever way he wants to communicate with us. So that could be that he wants to use visuals or art is a type of visuals. So maybe he wants to use art and visuals to talk with us about something. Maybe he wants to talk verbally. Maybe he uses like on the verbal note, maybe he uses echolalia or repeating noises and phrases to communicate. Or maybe he's using his behavior to communicate. So all behavior is a form of communication that can look like actions, what he gives his attention to, um, facial expressions, body language, etc. Yes. Okay. So as we're going through the rest of this, I'm not going to name the person directed approach directly as we go through. Just keep it in mind that any of the visual communications we used should be used with this person directed approach that we're talking about. Okay, so this is one of the most common types of visual supports that's used. This is a visual schedule. Its purpose is to show what's happening now, next, and later. It helps to reduce uncertainty. And of course, when we reduce uncertainty, we reduce anxiety. The visual schedule helps to keep everyone on the same page. So, if you're supporting someone, both you and the person are on the same page about what the day is going to look like. And these also aid with transitions. So transitioning from one activity to the next can be very challenging for a lot of people, and a visual schedule can really aid with that challenge. To use it, we would make a schedule at the beginning of the day or the activity, and then we would continue making and updating it throughout the day or activity. So in this example, this is an example or one that I've actually used with a friend that sometimes comes over to visit. And in this example, I would say, first we're going to eat, and then we'll make a craft. And then as we're making the craft, as we're nearing, as we're, getting close to the end of it, I'm saying, right now we're making a craft. The next thing we're going to do is listen to some music. Um, and of course, going back to person directed, whenever we're making a schedule with someone, we want to ensure that they have as much choice as possible while also respecting their routines that they have established. So in this example, I talked with the person, my friend, before he started coming over, and I asked him, what do you want to do when you come over? Like, do you want to make crafts? Do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to just talk? And he chose the activities, and I made a schedule for that so that when he came over, he would know exactly what to expect. And we're both on the same page about what our time together would look like. This next type of visual support is called a routine or task strip. And these are used like visual schedules, but they typically stay the same every time. This particular example was someone's physiotherapy routine. And it's really useful because it helps the person know what the routine looks like, but it also helps the support workers. So this person lived in a small options home, and sometimes there's new support workers, coming and going, and any support worker could look and know what the routine was, right? So it was a cue for the person and the support worker. You'll notice that this example has a blank spot on the left-hand side. These are often printed and laminated, and you can use a dry erase marker to check things off as they're finished. Some people also have them on Velcro and rip them off and they're finished, and that works too. But I usually go for the dry erase just because it can be really easy to lose the little Velcro picture squares. Yes. So this one is a task breakdown. And the example I'm showing is just one piece of the brushing teeth process. A task breakdown is very much what it sounds like. You take a task or activity and break it down into smaller steps. The level of breakdown that you need just depends on what the person you're supporting with this wants or needs. Yeah, if we were to use teeth brushing as an example, some people might be fine with put toothbrush on toothpaste, brush teeth, rinse mouth, rinse toothpaste, all done. Whereas another person, if they're learning this skill, might need a little bit more detail. So put toothpaste on toothbrush, brush top teeth, brush bottom teeth, brush front teeth, put water in cup, swish water in mouth, spit water out, etc. Right? So it's really just knowing the person or having them choose, how much detail they want or need. And these are particularly useful and mainly used for helping someone maintain or develop a skill. And they can be helpful particularly as well in that a lot of times people might have to verbally prompt or point to prompt. And if we have visuals available, we might not have to do that, and they may be able to do it more independently and not rely on prompting from somebody. One example that's particularly meaningful to me came from really early in my career. I was supporting someone who doesn't speak using words and needed a lot of assistance um, with his tasks as he went through his day. And he loved peanut butter toast. So I thought that he might like to be able to do that on his own so that he doesn't have to go to someone and like ask for peanut butter toast, right? Like as an adult, he'd probably like to be able to just get his own peanut butter toast when he wants it and not have to rely on somebody and get permission, etc. So we spent 6 months working with a task breakdown to learn each step of the making toast. And I'll show you the way that we broke it down, or I'll tell you. There's a lot more steps in a task than we might realize until we think about it. So there was get bread, get knife, get plate, get peanut butter, open the bread bag, take out the bread, put bread in toaster, push the lever down, wait for the bread to toast. That was a hard one for both of us. Transfer the toast from the toaster to the plate. Open the peanut butter container. Pick up the knife. Put peanut butter on the knife. Put peanut butter on the toast. Spread the peanut butter. And then take the plate to the table. So for most of us, when we think about making peanut butter toast, it's just, okay, we're just going to throw the toast in the peanut butter, or throw the toast in the toaster and put peanut butter on it when it's done. But when we're thinking about task breakdowns, there is often a lot more steps than we might realize. So we want to make sure that we are breaking it down to the right degree for the person we're helping with this, or with the person we're helping. Okay, so how do these three kind of fit together? And to be honest, I don't think it's really important to remember names or trying to figure out, is this a schedule? Is this a task strip? Is this a breakdown? I don't think that's really important. As long as the visuals are doing what they're meant to do or need to do. But I'll just show you how these can fit together. So the visual schedule is a higher level look at the day or period of time or activity, right? So in this example, we're watching TV, then having a snack, then using an iPad, and then going to bed. Where the task strip or routine breaks down what the routine is for going to bed, which is brush teeth, put on PJs, turn off light, get into bed. And then the task breakdown breaks down the individual steps in any one of those tasks. So in this example, it is brushing teeth. So it's get toothbrush and toothpaste, put toothpaste on toothbrush, brush teeth, and rinse mouth. And again, the task breakdown is to help the person learn or maintain a skill. This one is one of my favorite types of visuals, and it's really a go-to for me, especially if someone is struggling with transitioning from one activity to another, or is experiencing uncertainty, or is feeling escalated. So the purpose of this one is to show what's happening right now and what's happening next, or what we have to do first and what we're doing then or after. Um, these can be particular. So if someone is feeling escalated, they're not as able to take in information, right? So we know that we need to simplify our communication. This is a really good way of doing that because we can just say, first drive, then shopping, right? It's just a few words, or it could even just be the visuals. So pointing to drive, first drive, then shopping. And these are a great one to have when out in the community. Um, and what I have done in the past for a small options home or group home, for example, is to have these in people's bag as an emergency visuals and just kept some of the most common pictures in a bag with it to just put on, right? And that can prevent an escalation or calm one down. And they can just provide a lot more certainty and reduce anxiety. And in a pinch, I have just used screenshots on my phone, like taking a screenshot of, first this and then scroll, then that. So they can be very, very helpful. You can also use a schedule for this. So if you have your visual schedule in your hand, you can just kind of show the two things and be like, first this, then that. This is also one of my favorites. I mean, I think they might all be my favorite, to be honest, but this is a visual story, and it's one of the most common, useful, and versatile visual supports. They typically use verbal, written, and images to explain whatever message they're trying to get across. So some of the things that they're commonly used for is, what to expect from a new activity or situation. So what it'll look like, what are the steps involved. They can be used to help people understand how to act in certain situations, like different social situations. I've used them to help people understand about waiting in line to get a coffee, or, what's appropriate, what isn't, how to introduce yourself to someone, when it is and isn't okay to hug, different things like that. They can also be used to help someone understand or learn self and co-regulation techniques. They can also help to explain complex or abstract concepts, such as friendship in this example. So this one is, and this particular visual story is about a friendship with myself and someone else. Um, you wouldn't necessarily use the same story for another friendship because each friendship is a little bit different. So this one is specific to our friendship. And a lot of times, if someone lives in a supported environment, we unfortunately find that some people have no experience with friendships. So, and such was the case with this friend. So I started really simple with, a friend is someone I like to spend time with that does not work for me. Someone I can talk to about things that matter to me, someone who likes to do fun things with me, like go for coffee or listen to music, someone who cares about me and thinks I'm a good person. So that just, for someone who's never experienced friendship, that just helps to make it a little bit more concrete, right? This is what it looks like to be a friend. This is so when thinking about, abstract and concrete, one of the most abstract concepts for people is time, right? So this visual support, a visual countdown, it helps to give context to the passing of time. So like when we say something like 5 days, or we'll do this on the 16th, or we go to the library on Thursday, it really doesn't mean much to a lot of people, especially if they don't understand or tell the passing of time through a calendar. And that's where something like this can come in. Can be called like a sleep countdown or a day countdown. Um, and in this example, we're saying, I will go to the movie in 5 more sleeps. Um, an example of when you would use this would be like, an activity someone's looking forward to, or a holiday, or an event, or maybe even an appointment. Like some people might feel anxiety about an upcoming appointment for days, but if they can see the countdown, they can know, okay, not today, not today, not today. Um, and on the note of sleep countdown, I recently talked with someone that supports someone who will just go to sleep like 3 times in a night, and to try to overcome the 3 sleeps. So you can use whatever language you need, right? For a sleep countdown works for some people. You might have to use days for others. Yeah, just whatever works. A couple points on this is that it is helpful to use it at the same time every day for consistency. And anytime that the subject is mentioned, and it's extremely important that the countdown is accurate, because sometimes with sleeps, especially if there's more than a few, you might have to do like the count, like Monday to Tuesday, Tuesday to Wednesday, like to figure out how many sleeps. Because if it's incorrect, people lose trust in the process. The next type I'd like to talk about also help to give context to time, especially for people who don't tell time using clocks, or like a typical clock, I should say. Visual timers can aid in transitioning from one activity to the next, or to understanding when an activity is going to happen. So sometimes someone will really be waiting for supper time. You could set a timer to show when supper will be ready. Or they might be, I don't know, doing some art and have to go to an appointment shortly. So you might set a timer to show them how much time until it's time to leave. Um, Visual timers can be particularly useful when an activity someone's doing is not preferred, because without having a way to like understand how much time is passing, it can feel like it's just going to go on forever. So if someone can look at a visual timer and see, okay, it's not going to go on forever, it's just this much time, that can be very, very helpful and supportive. Um, there's also another type of visual timer is a night and day clock. So there are some times of the year where you can't tell if it's day or night by looking outside, right? Like sometimes in the winter it's dark outside, but it's really time to be up and doing stuff. And likewise, sometimes in the summer it could be light out when it's actually a more supportive time to be sleeping. At least for me, I'm an early bird. Um, so there are night day clocks that, and you can set what time is it shows night and day, just depending on what the person wants their schedule to be. And when it's night sleep time, it'll show like a blue color, or it could be a moon. There's different forms. And in the daytime, it might show a yellow color and or a sun, right? And you would just teach someone, like teach them how to use it, like how to look at it and tell, night sleep, day sun. And sun means I get up, moon means I'm in bed, I go to sleep. Um, there's lots of different types of visual timers. So you can get apps. A really common one is called Time Timer. And but there's lots of other versions that are really similar to Time Timer that you can find. Sand timers are another really common one, and you can get them in all different increments. You can also get physical visual timers like Time Timer. And you can get those in all different increments from like just a couple minutes up to like an hour. And someone in the chat says, I really like the at Timo for this. And that's spelled, I I think Timo. Um, so definitely check that one out. Thank you for sharing. Um, a really interesting thing that I'll share as well. I don't know if they're still making them because I haven't looked into it for a couple years, but I do know a few years ago, I was able to find a visual timer watch for someone. And that was very helpful and supportive for that person. I think it was the Time Timer brand, but there might be other ones. And I think, if someone uses an Apple Watch or a Google Watch or whatever, you can probably get visual timers on those as well. They're just, a bit more expensive. Yes. So here is another type of visuals, and that would be using visuals in the environment. And using visuals in the environment can help people to know what the function of a space is and what items belong where. So some common types or some common ways that visuals are used in the environment might be bathroom signs, exit signs, signs showing what garbage or recycling go in what bucket. You can also see like on these examples, labeling drawers or cupboards as to what goes in them. And you can also see or use labeling the function of a room. So someone, like sometimes rooms are labeled as quiet rooms, for example, where someone can go if they just need to get away for a few minutes to a less stimulating space. This is a choice board. Choice boards are used to communicate to a person that they have a choice and what their options are. And just like in the sleep countdown, it is very, very important that you make sure that all the options are possible before you put them on the choice board. Um, so for example, I I used to support someone that would like to use the choice board to decide what he wanted to have for a snack. And um, one day, I'll just share a mistake I've made. One day I just assumed there was still cheese in the fridge because like there was always cheese in the fridge. So I put cheese on the choice board, but there was not in fact cheese in the fridge. And, thankfully he was very understanding. But if that were to happen often, he would definitely lose trust in the process. And, especially if you don't, have an established relationship with someone, it can definitely serve to lose trust in you and the process. So let's take a look at an example. So here's an example of a choice board filled out. This is just letting someone know that they have a choice about what they're having for supper and what their options are. And again, these can be used for, so many different situations. One thing that I do want to say about them is that, ask the person or let them show you with their behavior or other communication method, if they don't communicate with words or whatever. Find out how many choices they prefer to have on their choice boards. Some people like to have 6 or 9 or as many choices as possible, where other people can find having a lot of choices, really overwhelming and might prefer 3. Um, if someone has experienced institutionalization, um, where they may not have had much voice, choice, and control over their life, it's often helpful to start with a lesser amount of choices, like the 3 choices, because um, choice can be really overwhelming when it's not something you have a lot of experience with, right? So this type of visual support is cause and effect. It can be used to show, um, if this happens, then this is what I need to do. So in this example, if it's sunny, then I will need sunscreen and a hat. It can also be used to show, like the effect of a behavior or action. So like, I don't know, if I yell, it scares the cat, and then I don't get to pet the cat. I don't know. That's not a very good example, but I think you get what I mean there. Um, and these can be used. This one has 2 different effects. So, the sunscreen and the hat. Very often there's just one. So it might just be, if I yell, then the cat runs away. Or um, yeah, that's all I can think of in the moment. But you can adapt this to the situation. Okay, let's talk a little. So I guess before we get into talking about making visual supports, I just want to name that um, those are just a few examples and some of the more common types, but as varied as verbal communication is, like visual communication is equally varied. Like the supports that you can make and use it's just like, if you can dream it, you can make it. Like, um, there's so many different ways these can be adapted, and there's so many other different types that are made for individual situations. Yes. So let's talk just a little bit about making visual supports. Um, some of the common programs that are used are Canva. So Canva is actually one of my favorite programs for making visual supports, just because it includes all the graphics and it's just really drag and drop, and I find it really versatile. But people also use, and I have also used, Google Docs, Microsoft Word, Google Slides, Microsoft PowerPoint, And Board Maker is another really common one. And Board Maker does include the graphics. They're more like the little stick figure ones if you've seen those, but Board Maker can be really useful if someone likes those graphics. But it's a little bit less user friendly than the other options I find. So most of what I've talked about are ones that I've printed and used. But there are also a lot of apps. They're called AAC, or Alternative Augmentative Communication, apps or devices. And there's different types. I've never actually found an app or program that does all the things, like that can do the stories, the schedules, and help someone press a button and make a word or sentence. So if anybody, I'll put this out there, if anyone knows of a program or app that does all the things, definitely send me an email or put it in the chat. I would love to know that. I've been looking for a while. But I've just listed some common ones. So Proloquo, or sometimes Proloquo to go, Avaz, or Lamps. I think it's Lamps Words for Life, maybe. Those ones are apps where a person would press a button or a number of buttons and it would talk and basically communicate for them. So that's helpful for people who may not speak using words or struggle to speak using words, or even people who just prefer to communicate that way. ChoiceWorks would be an example of an app that does like visual schedules, and Social Story Creator and Library is one where you can make and record social stories. I'm not going to say that these apps are the best, and that there are not better ones out there. I'm sure there are for different situations. I'm just throwing these out there as some that I've seen or used. And, I try to include some from the 3 different categories that are most commonly used, the social stories, the schedules, and the alternative way of communicating. Okay, so making your own visuals. The first thing we want to do is when you start making your own visuals, you want to start with identifying where and when they are needed. Some of the ways or some good things to consider are, where is the person or when is the person experiencing anxiety or uncertainty? Another thing to consider is, where is prompting needed? And could visuals offer some further independence, right? Because ideally, we want to reduce our use of prompting in exchange for ways that a person can instead have some more independence in that area. Another thing to think about might be, where does the person, or what does the person want to learn or get better at? And that could also be an opportunity for using visuals. So the next thing that I do when I'm making visual supports is I check and see, like, what is already out there, right? Is there already something out there that I can use? Sometimes the answer is yes. Usually the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is there is something, but I need to adapt it or individualize it. When we're making the visuals, it usually involves the use of also having, the written words on them as well. We want to make sure that we're using clear and plain language, and that whenever possible, we are echoing the person's language if it's appropriate. So, I don't know, what's an example? I can't think of one in the moment, but A lot of times people have certain words that they prefer to use for certain things. If it's appropriate to echo those words, we would use those words. In the making of the visuals, we ideally want to make sure that we are using the person-directed process that we talked about. So a lot of people I know want to either lead the process or take part in the process and choose what they have visuals about, especially for visual stories, I find. But one person that I know, a friend of mine, if we're making a story, he likes to just sit beside me and tell me what pictures he wants. Um, I'll ask him, does this sound okay? Do you like these words? Another person I know will or used to come to me and say, I need this. And then we go to the computer and we would find the visual that he wants and he would make sure it's the right one and then we would print it out. But other people would just prefer to delegate all of that to a support person or a family member, and that is completely okay too. So it's what the person wants, right? Some people just don't want to have to deal with it and would rather they have a support worker, they would rather pay their support worker to do that work. Um, Finally, we want to make sure that the story or the visual support is concrete. So what I mean by that, I'm going to show you some examples. And the more I work with individuals and organizations on this, the more I'm finding is that moving from abstract to concrete is like the skill when it comes to visual supports and really communication as a whole a lot of the time. It's also one of the hardest things to do well. So let's look at just a few examples, and I'm not going to say these are the best examples, but um, hopefully they'll get the message across. So on the left-hand side, we have, let's go for coffee. And it's a generic picture of a coffee cup, but we don't actually know what's in the cup. It could be tea. Whereas on the right-hand side, we're saying, let's go to Tim Hortons on Main Street to drink a coffee. And it's a picture of the actual place where we'll be having coffee. So it is a little bit more concrete. And in this example, let's say we were making a visual story and we said, we're going to go to the library, we'll stay for a while, and when we're done, we'll go home. That's quite abstract. Right? Like how long is a while? I know my husband and I both have very different different definitions of a while or soon, right? Um, so that's very abstract. But if we were to say, and this is something that I've actually done before, and someone has chosen as a supportive way of telling time, is, say we're going to go to the library and we will listen to 4 songs and then we will leave. So a person might have their headphones, listen to 4 songs as they're doing what they're doing. When the 4 songs are over, then it's time to go. I also know someone who would use songs to make time concrete when it comes to exercise, right? We're going to listen to 3 songs. We're going to dance for 3 songs. We're going to stretch for 3 songs. Okay. Now, this is one of the hardest and most challenging ways to think about move or to work with moving from abstract to concrete. Like, how would you explain things like respect, friendship, death, spirituality, or religion, and so many other things? There's so many other things that are abstract, right? One that came up a little while ago was How do you explain safety in a concrete way? Another time not too long ago, it came up like, how would you explain what the earth is in a concrete way, right? Like it is really challenging. Um, but one thing I'll offer you to think about when you're doing this is to think about and ask yourself, what does it look like in the person's life? So, what does friendship look like? What does respect look like? Um, the death one is really hard, or it can be really hard. I do have an example of that one that you can download and use and adapt, right? I have it in a PowerPoint. It's you can download it from our supporting grief and mourning webinar, and that's completely free. I'll include a link to it in the follow-up email that I send you all. Um, but yeah, if that's helpful, or even if you just want to look at what that can look like in a more concrete way, feel free to take a look at it and download it from there. Yes. So I know we've just dipped our toe in, but today we've talked about what visual communication is and why it's important, who visual communication helps, examples and types of visual supports, and a little bit about making your own visual supports. And I know that, you're not going to watch this webinar and feel like, oh yes, I'm like completely prepared to go out and do this. And that's expected. Um, if it's helpful, we do have an online self-paced visual communication course. Um, and I'll give you a coupon code for that in the follow-up email and a link if that's useful. If you are an individual with a disability or a family member and cost is a barrier to signing up for that, just send us an email and we'll make sure that you can get access to it. As family members and members of the disability community, some of us in our community, like the All About Inclusion community, um, we just want to make sure that what we offer is financially accessible to people as well. Um, we also offer in-person visual communication training. So sometimes organizations will hire us to come in and train their staff team on how to use visual communication, and we love doing that. Organizations also and individuals and families also hire us to create custom visual supports. One of my favorite things is to create like visual accessibility supports. So let's say a business has wants to be more accessible. We can help make like a visual accessibility guide and visual supports for them, and we love seeing that in the community. We also have a visual supports library, so every time we make visual supports we add to it, and I'll give you a coupon code to access that. I'll actually give anyone that signed up for this live event access to it for free, and feel free to download and use anything that is useful. And if you have any questions or want to connect with us, there is our email address, askus@allaboutinclusion.ca. And outside of visual supports, we also love collaborating. So if in the work you're doing, or if you have an idea and you're like, wow, we would really love to collaborate with them on this, um, we would love to hear from you. We're always open to that. So feel free to send us an email and just throw it out there. Um, some of the other services that we offer are in-person and online training and coaching. So things like supported decision-making, visual communication, autism, sensory support and co-regulation, and so much more. We also develop training directly for organizations. And we create tailored resources for people and organizations. And we do planning and implementation. So an example of that might be someone really wants to build more community in their life, or there's something that they really want to be doing with their life. We can help them with the planning process, but not just the planning, but the implementation and actually making it happen. So we love taking things from like the planning and actually making them happen in the real world. And if you want to connect with us on any of that, just send an email and you can take a look at our website if you want to learn more.